guys, today we're going to do Ozymandias by Shelley. So if you turn to that in your anthology, it's near the back. And you may be glad to know this is the last poem that we're going to do this year, unless we get through everything else. But obviously, in the current situation, it's unlikely that we'll do more than we normally would do in class. We are going to do some consolidation work next week, and we obviously need to still do a lot of comparison work and revisit the poems, make sure you can understand them. But in terms of new poems, this is the last one. And obviously we've still got our language stuff to do as well. So the key themes for Ozzy, if you want to jot them down at the top of your page, are power, nature and arrogance. Now I'm hoping that enables you to see that it is a really, really good comparison to Hawk Roosting, which had the same key themes. In the same way that Living Space and London are peas in a pod, so you can say the same thing about Hawk Roosting and Ozzy. So that'll be our starting point for comparison next week. Afternoons links really nicely to Ozzy as well. Okay, so why this poem matters, you don't need to write this down. I'm just putting trying to get you to care about it. The first thing that this poem speaks to me about is this idea of putting our lives into context with nature. I don't know if I've told you this story, but I went to the Isle of Skye in Scotland on my own. It's good a long time ago now, about 5 years ago, and I sat on a mountain range on my own and looked at this landscape that had been there forever, and it really did what this poem did. It puts into context the idea of the human life and nature, and that that idea that we are droplets in an ocean, and that nature will always be there, but in a really comforting way. And it really, I think, highlights this poem that it's good, that it's good in a way that human power should end, because the more power we get, the more we corrupt and the more we do terrible things with it. That's the idea sort of expressed. So like, imagine, for example, if Hitler had never been able to die, like had never been able to end his reign, and it had lasted forever. So it kind of makes you feel like it's a good job that nature overpowers humanity. Whereas you might look at Afternoons and think that it's quite a negative thing. Okay, so unlike Hawk, which makes us feel like power breeds power and you can't break the cycle, and once you're powerful, that's it, it'll last forever, Ozzy does leave us feeling that power can end. And like I said just now, it can be positive that power ends. And just like both Hawk and Afternoons, Ozzy makes us feel that nature will always be the most powerful thing. Kind of implied that already. Okay, I'm just going to read through the poem. It's really annoying me that those red lines there, it's because it's screenshotted, sorry. And then we'll go through it pretty much line by line, because it was written in 1818, so we're kind of looking at the sort of grammar style that we had in London, where sort of, might need to rearrange a few lines to make them fit into our modern grammar system so that it's easier to understand. So, Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the deserts. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculpture well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Okay, it is a tricky poem, especially the first time you read it, so we're going to check all your understanding first. While I'm doing step one, I would advise you to make your notes on a piece of lined paper rather than annotating it, because we're not really doing any direct analysis. I'm just literally going to tell you what the poem means and what the lines mean. When we get to step two, analysis linked to context, that might be when you move to your anthology, or when I think you should, and then final thoughts like we always do. Okay, so going through the poem then. Breaking it down. Firstly, Ozymandias, or Ozymandias as some people prefer to say, is a Greek word, and it is basically refers to Ramses II. Now you might see that spelled, I think it's got like 3 different spellings, because obviously it was such a long time ago, nobody can agree. So don't don't worry if you see different spellings. I just think this is the easiest spelling to remember. And he was a real guy. He was a real Egyptian pharaoh. He ruled for 66 years, which is a very long time. He lived till he was 90 because he existed before Christ, so a very long time ago. And he built a massive empire. So that's pretty much, the most things that you need to know about him. But just the title straight away captures this idea that he's writing about a real person. So these lines that are underlined in blue are the only words that the speaker actually directly says in the whole poem. The rest of the poem is what the traveller said to him. Now, I know there's no quotation marks, but that colon indicates that, that's the end of the speaker's words, and the rest is what the traveller said. So this is what we'd call a frame. You might see it in a novel or in a film where we start that, the start of the novel is something that's happening and then it flashes back to tell the story. For example, that's a frame. Sadly, I'm thinking of Titanic as an example, with old Rose flashing back to young Rose. I'm sure there's a far more highbrow example I could have given you. So it's framed by the speaker telling us that he met a traveller from an antique land who told him, and then the poem is what the traveller says. So just make sure when you're writing your essays that you distinguish between the two. Most of the words come from the traveller, obviously written by Shelley. Okay, antique land tells us that the traveller was from an ancient kingdom. If you want it, so translate antique land into ancient kingdom. And obviously, because the title of the poem is Ozymandias, then we can work out that that was Egypt, because that is where he ruled. Okay, next, what we have is a description of this statue of who we assume is Ozymandias in the desert. Okay, so we have in green 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone. They're standing in a desert. Trunkless means that it's got no torso, so no, like from the waist up. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage is a face, lies, and the face has a frown and a wrinkled lip and a sneer of cold command. So if we were in class, I would currently get you to draw an image of that so I know you understand it. But as we're not in class, I have pre-prepared one for you. Ta-da! So we do later find out that the legs are on a pedestal, but it doesn't tell you that yet, and I've drawn what is represented in these lines. So we've got the 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone. So we've got no top, it's just the bottom of his body. They stand in the desert. Do you like my desert? I even merged yellow and orange. It just looks orange on the computer. That was a waste of shading. Near them on the sand, so not next to them, but near them, as if the wind might have blown them away. We have a shattered visage, a shattered face of his statue. It's half sunk in the sand, and you can just see there it's not a very good sneer. But we've got the frown and the wrinkled lip, the sneer of cold command. So that is basically what Shelley describes, or the traveller describes, the statue looking like in the present day, which was obviously 1818. Although he doesn't really give us any indication of when the speaker is speaking to us. If you think you can draw a better image than me, feel free to send it to me on the Instagram and I will post it. Challenge Miss Bird. I'm sure many of you will do a better job. Okay, let's go back then to the first part of the poem. Okay. So that's what the statue looks like. In orange then, tell that it's sculpture well those passions read. Now the sculptor is the person who made the statue, who would have shaped it out of stone. And if you kind of rewrite this so it's written sort of with modern grammar, then what that line means is it tells us that all of that description of the statue tells us that the sculptor who made it, read the passions of Ozzy well. So in other words, he captured Ozzy's style of leadership, his personality, what he cared about. And what he cared about was having a cold leadership style. He was quite elitist, you could say, because of his sneering style. Someone who leads by fear and not love. Okay, so that's what that line means, and I do think it's quite an important line So, you know, reread that if you need to and kind of get your head around it, or get in touch with me if you're still not sure. Okay, we then have which yet survive. So all of these things that Ozzy was are surviving because they are here in this statue, which a sculpture made obviously hundreds of years before. So his personality, his passion survive because they're stamped or etched or carved into the statue, which is the lifeless thing. And we'll analyse that later on. Oh, sorry. I forgot to put a box up for the last bit. So, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. It might not be that I forgot. I think I just wanted to explain it to you. This is a very complicated line, and it's quite debated, because if you have a look, we've not had a full stop at all since the start of the poem. Let me just check that. Nope. So it's really hard to follow the grammar in terms of which hand is being referred to here and which heart. Now, my personal interpretation that I prefer is that the hand is the sculpture. It belongs to the person who made the sculptor. Sorry, the person who made the statue, who was gently mocking Ozymandias in the way he presented him. You could perhaps read it as Ozzy's hand mocking his subjects. It's debatable. And don't worry about it. Okay, so next part of the poem. You'll notice it's all in one stanza. It's actually written in a sonnet form. But I don't feel like that's something you necessarily need to be worrying about. I don't feel it particularly adds to your analysis. So we'll move on. Okay, so we then find out in this line, in line 9, that there's a pedestal upon which words are written. So if you think back to my drawing, based on line 9, we would have to move the legs so that they were stood on a pedestal. Here's a picture of a pedestal for you. So it's like that sort of, you know, cube-shaped, beautifully ornate sort of stand that the statue actually goes on. And they do often have writing on them, don't they, with the person's name and what year and their greatest achievements. So let's have a look what Ozzy's greatest achievements were. Already said that. He says, this is what he's chosen to have in his statue. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. So, he's decided to include his name. Well, fair enough. His status, he's very boastful. He's decided to call himself King of Kings. It's quite godlike of him. And his invitation to others, it's not really an invitation, it's a command to others. Look on my works, he's insisted. And despair. So he wants people to look at what he's done, his big empire, his amazing, you know, society that he's built up, all the riches that he brought because he invaded other places. He wants people to feel miserable about it, like they're jealous or that they've not done as much as he has. That's what Shelley wants to highlight, that this man was most proud of. So you can see a lot of links to Hawke there, hopefully. Right, the next line, nothing beside remains. I think you can read in two different ways. So you can either see it as nothing else is there, nothing else is still there, or you can see it as there is nothing there besides remains, the leftovers of the leftovers of his work, the leftovers of this life that he created in this sort of big empire. There's only remains left, and that's it. Okay, and of course it's completely ironic. His work that he's saying, look on my works, it's just not there. Imagine a man stood in the desert going, look at my amazing empire, and we're like, we're looking, but we can only see a ruined statue and desert. So it's very ironic. The kingdom itself is now antique, and that's a nice link back to the idea of an antique land in line 1. And so he then goes on to emphasize the irony. You know, he really builds it, he really milks it, he really like gets it in there. The fact that it's decaying and that it's a colossal wreck. Colossal wreck is a great phrase. It's like it's massive, and it's just destroyed. Wreck is there's no way back. And then finally at the end, we've got this description of sort of the wider landscape, and this is where all of the nature ideas really come together. So boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So it ends with a description of the desert, which is now free, it's boundless, it's alone. It's now that time, which obviously is also nature, has defeated the empire and civilization, and all that's left is nature. All traces of this empire, this kingdom, have all gone, and all that we have left is the desert, is nature. Okay, and obviously we'll get more into that later. Right, so I think pause, go back, make sure you do understand each line before you go any further, so that you have got a good grasp of understanding before we try to do any analysis. Oh, sorry. So that's kind of like the key feeling that the poem leaves you on, that nature or the planet will outlive us all, which is good timing because it was Earth Day yesterday, so hopefully you had a chance to celebrate the Earth. Newsflash, this is actually a real statue. So it was in 2017 when they found a statue in the desert that they believed was Pharaoh Ramses or Ozymandias. So Ozymandias is the Greek version of the... Oh, I did tell you that. I will put the link to this article in the description so you can go and have a look. There's a video of it being unearthed. So yeah, brilliant. It was really weird because the first year the exam board put Ozymandias on the spec. Is the same year it was found. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so step 2 now, definitely be using anthology now. We're going to be annotating analysis and ideas. So let's get started. Right, the title. Again, I've put context in bold. So the title acts for confirmation of who the traveller is speaking of. Like, that's the role of the title in this poem. And Shelley chooses a real-life pharaoh who built empires using violence. He had hundreds of children, so like loads of different wives. He had like even his family were an empire in themselves. And like we said, he ruled for a very long time. So by picking a real pharaoh whose power has obviously ended, it's a really effective way for Shelley to highlight that power does end. Okay, antique land, remember we said that means kingdom, emphasises immediately that Ozzy's power and life's work is now past. It's irrelevant. You know, this traveller is coming to tell us about this statue and this man, but he's from an antique land, so it's not that important. Not that I'm saying the past is not important, because it is. The use of the frame, the idea of, you know, why is it not just the speaker who's gone and seen this statue in a desert? Always ask yourself what other choices the writer could have made. Well, for me, it creates a distance between this land and the speaker, so it makes it even more remote and unimportant. If the speaker had managed to go to this land and see it for himself, then it doesn't feel as irrelevant or remote, because, you know, he's obviously cares enough to go to that place and see it. Remember, this is 1818, so you know, travel to Egypt wouldn't have been particularly common. I don't know if Shelley ever went there. I don't think he did. He did a lot of travel in Europe. You can check for me if you want. So I really think that this use of the frame and the idea of a traveller telling the story makes what happened there even more unimportant. So those two things build together really nicely into one kind of secure argument. All right, let's just have a look at the description of Ozzy. We need to pick out really these 4 key words for word lab analysis. Firstly, vast represents the power he once had, and contextually that's because he invaded places to build his empire. So he had a vast empire, and that is represented by the vast legs of stone. The rest of the description really symbolise his sunken power. So we've got stand and lies, the very inactive verbs that suggest that he's now powerless, you know, as symbolised by his statue being powerless. And then the shattered face is obviously destroyed, like connotations of that is that it's destroyed, there's no way back. Remember that it's been shattered by time, it's been shattered by nature, because it obviously links to the overall idea. Okay, we've then got the wrinkled lip, the sneer of cold command. Wrinkled, sneer, cold command, they just capture his rule, and he was a ruthless, cruel and fearful leader. Excuse me. Oh, sorry guys. So contextually, Shelley was really against the British Empire. If you think about this, the year, it's 1818, same as London, we're in the Industrial Revolution. We're at the height of the British Empire because, this is a time when our industry really put us as a world leader, really. And I'm trying to be objective when I say that rather than arrogant. And then, so Shelley uses Ozzy as a way to criticise the British Empire, to criticise our arrogance, that we can overpower the rest of the world, and that our rule and our dominance will last forever, which we can already see now, 200 years later, that it wouldn't. So it highlights that those who rule empires are unworthy leaders, and through that he's criticising his own government, his own rulers. And the final line here, that it sculptures well those passions red, it really just cements that that's what Ozzy was. So rather than describing this statue and moving on, he takes the time to emphasize to us that it is correct, that what the sculptor did was a really good representation of who this leader was. So it just kind of emphasizes his idea so that we trust, so it's more powerful. Okay, and the last line that we're going to analyse from this first section of the poem, try not to see it as two different sections, because obviously I've just split it up because of PowerPoint, not because of any other reason. The colon helps. So it says, which yet survive. Now ask yourself, what helped them survive? And the answer is art. It's this sculpture. I keep saying sculptor and sculpture. Very similarly. So it's the statue itself, which is a piece of art that has enabled all of this to survive, not necessarily in a rich way, but it's still there. So Shelley here alludes to the power of art in overcoming the power of nature. Now, we can link that contextually to the idea that he's a romantic poet, and I think we did romantic poets last year when we did Byron, but I do want to remind you of this. So this is like a key outline of romantic poets, and can you write this at the back of your anthology rather than on your Aussie poem, because you'll also need it when we do Keats to autumn, which we will leave to year 11 unless we have time to come back to it this year. So Shelley, Keats and Byron are the three poets in your anthology who can be categorised as romantic poets. And general features of the romantic poets. I'm sure I did teach you this last year, so it is just recall really, and revisiting it. They celebrated nature, art, creativity, spirituality and feelings. And in the time of the Industrial Revolution and following the age of science, so we think of Newton, who'd been a few hundred years earlier, they were really rejecting the sort of prevailing ideas of the time, which were all linked to science and industry and reason and logic. And the romantic poets celebrated the opposite of that. They celebrated walking through the woods and having really spiritual moments, connecting with nature, using language, using their writing, using art to really focus human beings on things that mattered, which are their feelings and their instincts, and their thoughts, rather than the scientific mathematical approach to life. So hopefully you can see by the way he celebrates art in this poem that's coming through, and also the fact that he celebrates nature and the power of nature as well. Okay, pause here if you need more time to get that down. Okay, so we've got which survive, and they survive through art. He's celebrating the power of art as the one thing that overcomes the power of nature, time, in the poem so far. So a way to sort of summarise everything I've just said is to say Shelley celebrates art as a way to defeat time, to produce a lasting piece of work that's more powerful than the Pharaoh's empire. This reflects his romantic poet sensibilities. He celebrates the power of art. It also reflects his rejection of the control and arrogance of empires. So you got a lot of lovely contextual links to that section. And it's not just this. I do build on this argument later on, so don't feel like this is the only time he mentions art as a powerful thing. And I think the one later on is more powerful than this one. The other thing he says is that, they survive all these things about him, that he's got a cold visage, etc. Sorry, his cold command, shattered, wrinkled lip, etc. They survive because they're stamped on these lifeless things. So the lifeless things is obviously the statue. But let's just analyse and pick this apart now. So he returns to the fact that Ozzy's work is now dead because it's stamped onto lifeless things that cannot grow, and therefore lack power. One of the most powerful things about life is that it can grow and change and evolve. Stamped suggests it's like a pale imitation. It's not really survived, has it? It's just a sort of, do you remind me of the portraits in Harry Potter, when someone says to Harry that it's a pale imitation of the person, that the real person that it was. It's just the key moments of the key aspects of their personality, but doesn't really capture everything that they were. So it's not that Shelley's like, oh, it's so sad that we didn't get to remember the whole person. He's very much undermining what's left in terms of nature's destroyed everything, really. We've just got this pale imitation left of what you once were. Okay, last section. The words are obviously really important because they are what he chose to say about himself. And the words are written in first person, which is quite unusual, isn't it? If you think about statues you see nowadays, it's always this, the name and then the year and then what they achieved. It isn't what they might have a quote that they've said, but it's not that they've decided what to say about themselves. So he's speaking for himself, as boastful rulers often do, and it also suggests more subtly he's really not interested in what others would say about him. He doesn't care. He's not saying, the people loved me. That's not what he's choosing to highlight about himself. Instead, it's pretty disgusting what he's choosing to highlight about himself. So there's just so much arrogance here. And I think that to evaluate, this is the part of the poem which really captures his arrogance the most. That might be useful if you're comparing to Hawke. He wants people to be amazed by him. Look at what I've done, and despair. He wants them to be jealous or to feel bad about themselves because they've not achieved as much, or they know that they would be powerless before him. Shelley was very impatient with British arrogance and worldwide domination, and obviously he's anti-empire, he's anti-control. He did travel quite a lot in Europe, giving him an insight into how we're seen abroad, and I think there's sort of echoes of Brexit there as well, if you want to think about it in that way. It's not too important that he travelled in Europe. It's not like, the Examiner's not desperate for you to say that, but I think it just gives you a nice context to the kind of life he lived and how he actually got to see Britain from a different perspective. And he was very lucky because travelling in those days was obviously quite expensive and was something that, only a very few select people would have been able to do. Obviously, we've also got the irony of, almost like the juxtaposition of these words with the actual reality, that there's just nothing to look at. And we've also got the imperative, look on, which again is just typical of a ruler and highlights his command. So you could link the word command, cold command, to look on as evidence of his kind of, demanding nature. Just always remember to step back and think what a good leader is, someone who, in terms of, or especially from our perspective today, so compassionate, looks after the people that they're supposed to be like ruling over or elected to lead over. Obviously, this wasn't a democracy. Loving and that, well, the core concept is ruling by fear versus ruling by love. So just always step back and remember what kind of leader he could have been, and that Shelley would probably celebrate, and what kind of leader we have here, which is one who just ruled by fear and went and destroyed lots of places just to gather riches for himself and build himself an empire. Okay, I've already kind of talked about the two ways to interpret Nothing Besides Remains. So we've also got round the decay of that colossal wreck. So I've kind of already said this really, but delay and colossal wreck emphasises how destroyed the life works of Ozzy are, and Shelley emphasises that empires must fail. Power cannot last forever, and of course that is because he was against the British Empire. Just remember that colossal really emphasises the size. It's not just, It's not just the statue that's represented by the word wreck. It's not just a massive destroyed statue. It's a massive destroyed way of living, and it's an empire, and it's power. It is literally power that is a wreck on the ground, or human power anyway. So there's a lot of layers to that word colossal wreck. Sorry, it's not a word, it's a phrase. Okay. This is where we come back to the idea of the power of art. So we've got these words on the statue, on the pedestal, really clear. And then we've got that followed by nothing besides remains. It's this idea that the words have survived. So if you link this back to yet which survives, and which we've just talked about, the power of the actual statue and the sculptor who's managed to sort of transcend time by creating something that lasts, the words have done the same thing. The words have lasted enough time for them to still be legible, for this traveller to come and speak to our speaker. So Shelley again here is celebrating the power of art, and this time he's celebrating writing, the power of writing to transcend time, to overcome time and survive and last. So again, he's reflecting the priorities of the Romantic poets there, and that idea of celebrating art as a way of capturing all that is great about the world. The idea of the power of art is definitely more like a band 5 approach to this poem. Okay, last bit then, just build, word level analysis, really diving into this description of the desert. Boundless, man is absent now. There's no civilization left. All that's left is desert, so it's boundless. It's got no barriers, and you've got a lovely link there to the idea of trees bordering in afternoons. There's complete freedom for nature. It's bare, it's naked, and I think there's like not an innocence, a kind of like blank slate feel to that line, that it's just bare desert. It's back in its original form, the way it was meant to be. Lone suggests that sand and nature, that's all there is. If we think of the sand, the desert, as representing nature, that's all that is there, that's all that can survive. Level sands, I don't know, I guess the idea that they've not been disturbed by people. And they stretch far away. So it suggests that for all the eye can see, there is only nature, and that's all that will survive through time. But obviously you've got the references to art surviving as well. So definitely ends on a real celebration of nature, and the idea that no matter how powerful or arrogant you are, no matter how much you think that your legacy will last forever, time will end it, time will destroy it, and the world will move on. Okay, so conclusions / writer's ideas. Given that Shelley was against the British Empire and the establishment and rulers and control in general, he presents the idea that rulers and empires will fade. So I'm just kind of summarising what we've already said. Him being against the establishment is something you can link really nice to Blake in London, with the church and the palace and what he says there. Because of this, because he's been against the empire, etc., he highlights the negativity and arrogance of leaders who rule by fear and cruelty, especially through cold command. As a romantic poet, he celebrates the power of nature to defeat the power of human beings. And his romantic nature is also present in his celebration of art through the sculpture, who can capture reality really well, while those passions red, and also the fact that both the art and the writing survive. And remember that writing is a form of art. Okay, final thought. The poem itself speaks to the power of art, but in terms of, Shelley wrote this poem 202 years ago, and here we are 202 years later learning about the power of art and nature because of his poem. So just like the words of the statue and the way that they symbolise the prevailing power of art, the poem itself does the same thing. So it's like I don't know, powerception, just all the ideas inside of other ideas. And I don't know, maybe when you're older, or even in 10 minutes time, you will write a poem about the power of art, and the cycle will continue. Okay, goodbye, thank you.